So I'll start with chord tones. Here we go. Remember, you're just practicing trying stuff. Don't worry about what it sounds like. B, A, E. Let's try it one more time. Some more minor pentatonic. One more time. Banjo land, Mike Hedding here. I've got another banjo lesson for you today. This time we're going to talk more about improvisation. So I think improvisation is one of the absolute best skills you can develop as a musician. One, it's going to allow you to play on songs you've never heard before. It's going to allow you to expand your creativity, and it's a ton of fun. Improvisation is something I find a lot of people struggle with. They don't know where to start. They're very nervous about playing stuff that doesn't sound right. And especially for adults, this is something I found adult students struggle with a lot. It's just being free, playing some stuff, even if you don't know the song or you don't know what notes are going to work. And that is part of what we're going to work on for this lesson, is building up your confidence to play stuff even if it doesn't sound perfect, kind of fighting through the pain. And you know, that's part of the process. You got to play a lot of stuff that doesn't sound good before you can play some stuff that does sound good. So we're going to look at a 12-bar blues progression in the key of E, and we're going to look at a couple different ways you could improvise over this progression. We're going to start with a really safe option of basically playing the chord tone, so the notes that make up each chord, and that's a very safe way to start your improvisation. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some more notes outside of the scale. So we're going to look at a minor pentatonic scale instead of a major scale, and that's going to give us, again, some more options, a little spicier flavor that we can add to what we're cooking up in the kitchen, so to speak. And lastly, we're going to look at adding even more color tones using the blues scale. So with these three options, we basically have, we're going to go from kind of really safe improvisation to getting a little bit more out on a limb. And then if we feel like we're in doubt, we can go back to those safe chord tones. That's what I want to work on for this lesson. And then last thing we're going to do is I'm going to play a couple solos that have some notes that sound way outside of the scale, that sound really bad. And what we're going to practice for this last part is just building up your confidence to play bad notes. And once you do that, it's really freeing, I found, because once you're not really worried about playing bad notes, you can really have a lot more fun. You'll learn a lot more, and you'll learn to stay away from those bad notes because you're not really afraid of them. You can kind of embrace them, and you'll learn to make a mistake basically work in your improv, and that's really important. And if you're watching the preview of this lesson, you can head over to my website, MikeHeddingMusic.com, and grab the full lesson. You'll get access to watch all the videos, and you can download the tabs and the practice tracks for this lesson. All right, here's learning to improvise using the blues. All right, let's start breaking down this lesson on improvising using the 12-bar blues. We're going to use a classic 12-bar blues progression in the key of E. And I've just got my banjo in regular G tuning. I haven't retuned it all. And I just use the key of E because it's very popular with playing the blues. You know, if you have a friend that plays guitar, they'll probably love to play the blues in the key of E. But you could really do this exercise in any key you wanted to. If you felt more comfortable playing in G, you could do that as well. All these same concepts will apply to whatever instrument or whatever key you're playing in. And all these things will work, you know, just their general improvisation tips. Okay, so let's start by making sure we've got the chord progression down, and then we'll get into some different improvisation techniques you can use. So remember, we're in the key of E, and we're going to start with just an E chord. We'll break down the intro in a second, but the standard form starts with an E chord. So I'm just doing basically like my normal C chord, except my first finger is moved to the third string instead of the second string. And I'm going to kind of omit the fifth string for that one. So that's my E major. And then, so we have one measure of that, and then we're going to go to A7. So you can do either your A bar chord, or you can add your A bar chord plus your pinky on the fifth fret. So we got that for one measure, and then back to E. And then E7, so take off your third finger. And then A7 for two measures, and then E for two. And then B7, so two ways you can do it. One, you can move your second finger to the second fret of the third string, move your first finger to the first fret of the first string, and then just play the top three strings. So you've got two open and one. So that's a nice one, from this E to this B7, and then you can easily go back. The other way you can do it is you can slide up to your bar chord at the fourth fret, and then add your pinky on the seventh fret of the first string. That's just this A7 moved up 2 frets. And when I do this chord, you can notice I'll drop my thumb down to help me. So that's what we got there. So we got B7 for one, and then we're down to A7, and then back to E7. And then a quick B7, so you have E, and then 2 beats on the B7. And then we'd be back. So that's a 12-bar blues. So we've got E for 1, A for 1, it's 2 measures, E for 3, E7 for 4, A for 2, 5, 6, back to E for 2, 7, B, 9, A, 10, and then E for 2, and then a quick B. So that's where you get the 12 bars. So classic 12-bar blues progression, very, very common. So that's the progression we're going to use. And for this whole lesson, I would kind of concentrate on what you're doing with your left hand. You can see with my right hand, I was just kind of half strumming and half rolling. You know, I wouldn't really worry about it at first with your right hand. You can get into that in some later lessons. But this lesson is really just to dip your toe in the water with improvisation. So the first thing is getting the chords down, okay? So that's the chords to the 12-bar blues progression in the key of E. We're using E major, A7, and B7. Okay? So let's start with our first improvisation tool, and this one's kind of the safest, and that's why I think it's easy to start with. You can kind of think of, you know, your improvisations in terms of a kind of like a spicy level. That's my analogy for this lesson. So you've got kind of mild, not very spicy, and then you've got extremely spicy. So that's just kind of my analogy I'm going to use for this lesson. And basically, the mild version will be playing notes that are in the chord and very safe notes. And then as you get spicier, we're going to be working with some notes outside of the scale that'll create some more tension, aka spice, okay? So the first one we're going to do is kind of the mild spice level, and this one is a good one to dip your toe in the water because it's really safe. So what we're going to do for this first one is each of those chords we just played, E, A7, and B, are made up of notes, and those notes are called the chord tones. So you don't have to remember all this, but it would be helpful. But this kind of general music theory stuff is chords are made up of notes, and the notes that make up a chord are called the chord tones, or chord notes, but usually it's called the chord tones. So for the major chord, it's the 1, 3, and 5 notes of the scale. And this is stuff I would digest slowly. I don't expect you to get this overnight. But basically, you can think in general concepts, 3 notes of the E scale make up the E chord. So 3 notes of the E major scale, or whatever scale you're playing, can be used to build the E major chord. And it makes sense if you think about it, because notes within the scale would also be used to build the chord, and that's why those notes sound so safe, is because they're in the chord. So you're not playing a note that's very far outside of the notes that you're hearing when you play the chords. That's why it's safe. Okay, so let's get our chord tones for each chord, and then we can use those to start creating a little blues solo. So you probably know more chord tones than you think you do, because if you just put down your chord and just play each note on its own, each of those notes is a chord tone. So we've got our low 2nd fret on the 4th string, that's our E note. We've got our 1st fret 3rd string, that's our G sharp. And we've got our open 2nd string, that's B. So those are the 3 notes that make up an E major chord: E, G sharp, and B. And you don't have to remember those, although it would be good practice. I would suggest if you can memorize those notes, it would be good practice. So you got E, G sharp, and B. So in the tab, I have listed a bunch of places to play those on the neck. You can do them down here. And then we're going up to a high E on the 2nd fret of the 1st string. You could go up here to, I'll go strings high to low. We got 6, 5, 4, 6. That's like another E chord. We got up here at the 9th fret bar chord. And we got up here at the 14th fret, 14, 12, 13, 14. So those are just a couple E chords. There's more obviously on the banjo, but just to give you a couple to get started. So each of these positions could be a potential spot where you could start or end a solo, okay? And we'll talk about that once we get into practicing with the practice track. For A, we've got our bar chord at the 2nd fret. And you can either play the 5th fret or the open 5th string. The A7 chord is actually made up of 4 notes. So we're going to use the 1, 3, and 5 that we used to build the major chord. And then we're going to add one more note, which is called the flat 7th. And that's where you get the A dominant 7. In this case, our flatted 7th note is a G. So you can do that with the open 5th string or 5th fret. You can use the open 3rd string. And we're going to do the A chord there. We've also got an A chord up here. I'll go from high to low again. We got 5, 5, 6, 7. And you can also use the 7th fret up here. So you got there. You can do it up here. You got, what is that, 11, 9, 8, 10, and 11. So I'm going through these kind of quick, but they'll make more sense in a second. And then we got up here, we got 14, 12, 14, 14, and 14. So that's our A7. And the notes of that chord are A, C sharp, E, G, and then A again. So you notice one thing right off the bat, we have one note that's shared by both of those chords. So what note is that? Our E note, right? So that might be a spot right off the bat where if you're ever in doubt, play that note. Obviously it makes sense, it's the root note, but you could play that E note and that would work for both the E and the A chord, so you could play that note through a majority of your solo and it would work the whole time. So that's one thing we'll talk about as this lesson gets further is once we figure out the chord tones for each chord, we see if there's any similarities between the the three chords, and that's a spot where we can start playing some notes and creating a solo. And lastly, for B7, we've got, I'll show you a bunch of them. We got the first fret on the low string. We got fourth fret on the low string. We've got second fret, third string, open B string. So the notes of that chord are B, D sharp, F sharp, and then A. So again, it's the 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. It's a B7. We could also do those here, fourth fret on the fourth string, second fret, fourth fret on the third string, fourth fret, and then fourth fret. So that's like kind of like a bar chord. You can do it up here. That's just like your A7th chord now moved up 2 frets. That's another one you can do. You can also grab the 8th fret. I'm giving you a bunch of options here. And then lastly, you can do 13, 11, 10, 12, and 13. That's another one you can do. Or this way. So again, now we have the chord tones for each chord. We got E, A, and B. Okay, so let me turn on the practice track, and I'm going to start playing through that progression, and I'll just use chord tones the first time. So ones I might use right off the bat are the E note. That's shared between the E and the A chord. Another one that's shared between the E and the B chord is the B note. So that open second string, or fourth fret, third string is in the E chord. It's also in the B chord. So that'd be, again, another really safe note. So kind of look for those similarities between the two chords, or three chords. You know, see if there's any notes that all three or two of the chords have in common. That's just a perfect spot you can look to start creating some improvisations. So let me pop on the practice track, and I'll play through the chords a few times, or I'll play through an improvisation a few times, just using chord tones only. Here we go. We're going to start with a little intro. Here comes the B. Here we go. A. Back to E. B. A. E. B. I'll go up here and try it. I'll try adding some slides this time. A, E, A, E, B, A. So you see, again, what we want to practice here is just starting somewhere. It's not going to sound perfect off the, right? Your first improvisation is not going to be amazing, and that's totally expected. And what I want you to do here, again, is be just the player and not the critic. It's really easy to get too critical of your own playing, and that's really going to impede your progress. Because if you can't try some stuff and really experiment, it's going to be really hard to ever improvise, okay? So I can't stress enough, you have to experiment. You got to try a lot of stuff. It's not all going to sound perfect, and that's a big part of the process, okay? But you can see with those improvisations, it felt pretty safe, right? There was nothing that really felt too outside of the scale, and this is just really good ear training for you as well to practice hearing those chord tones and how they work. But the chord tones are a really safe spot to go if you're ever in trouble. So now let's move on and let's look at adding some notes outside of the scale. So a couple other notes that work really good with blues are what's called the flatted third, and we already used another one, the flatted seventh. So let's apply that to the key of E, and this time we're going to use more of what's called like a minor pentatonic scale. So we're going to do second fret on the low string, that's our E, and now we can also use the open D string, which is our flatted seventh in E. So again, we're getting outside of chord tones now and playing spicier notes. Again, back to my analogy, this is going to sound spicier. There's going to be more tension because we're playing notes that are more outside of the chord tones, okay? So we have second fret and open. On the third string, we've got open. That's our flatted third. So instead of using the G sharp, we might flat that note, lower it a half step to open, which again is going to have a very bluesy sound. So we've got two open on the fourth string. We can do two open on the third string. And then on the high string, we can do open two, and then fifth fret. Or fifth fret on the first string, or open fifth string. And for this exercise, we're going to use those same notes for all the chords, okay? And I'll show you at the end how to apply some of these ideas, or to mix them all together. But let's skip going to the chord tones for each chord, and now let's just use that minor pentatonic scale. You can also use the open second string. Sorry, I didn't say that. So you have... has a more of a minor sound. They call it the minor pentatonic scale. So let's pop on our practice track again, and now let's use some of those notes. You're going to hear how it sounds even bluesier, has more tension. It's going to sound further outside of the scale, less safe, quote unquote safe. Here we go. Here's the intro.
4.
All right, I'm going to use the minor pentatonic scale. Here we go. Start adding some hammer-ons and slides too. That sounds nice. I'll go up a little higher. Time. All minor pentatonic there. So you hear how that has a bluesier sound. It's also interesting because we're using the same scale on all the chords. So we're using the E minor pentatonic scale. The root chord is E, so that's a very safe scale to use.